I beg you to try it, Patricio.
Let me get this straight, Carla. You disagree on the weapon, you disagree on the number of blows.
Listen to me, Patricio. You were there once in your life.
Hey people, Trish Wood here. And this is the Trish Wood is Critical podcast. Very, very happy today to have a guest on. It's the second appearance for him. His name is Chris Elston, and he's known around the world now as Billboard Chris. He is a Canadian father from Vancouver. He's got a super duper Canadian accent, Vancouver accent, which is I recognize very well, being from there, who courageously travels around North America mostly, sometimes with a sandwich board that says that children cannot consent to puberty blockers, and his thesis is that children are never born in the wrong body. What happened with Chris is that, like with all people who have this kind of incredible heroic foresight, there's an issue that captures them before other people realize what's going on, and they're immediately driven to speak out and to campaign. And he's been doing that for a few years now. It's an extraordinary story, and you're going to hear it from Chris later in the show. I'm really glad to have him on. We had him on about a year and a bit ago after he was attacked by some of these black bloc Antifa-looking weirdos in Montreal. I mean, really, I think they broke his arm or something. It was just a terrible attack. He's a peaceful protester sticking up for kids against this cult-like trans ideology. And he's risking a lot, but he's driven the way people who become aware of let's call it a catastrophe, because this trans ideology focused on children is a catastrophe for kids. The people who figure that stuff out first usually do pay a price, and he's paid that price. But the great thing for Chris now is that he is getting quite a lot of attention, including he was on Vivek Ramaswamy, the Republican presidential primary contender, the other day, which is great. So he's getting a lot of lift now, and he's just pulled the rest of us along. I was asleep at the switch when he'd figured this out, but when I fully understood, reading Abigail Schreier's book and other kind of interesting and somewhat scholarly works on this issue of trans ideology taking over our kids and our schools and capturing the minds of lefty politicians and our federal government too. Let's talk about Bill C-6. Yikes. I was kind of off working primarily just on COVID, and this crept in. And then I read Abigail's book and other interesting stuff on both sides of the argument and realized that there's a real problem here, that what's happening is not based on science. It's based on cult-like belief in something very much like religion. It's not based on facts or documentable science or proof or even any information at all that this is good for children. And we'll get into that a bit with Chris. I, as you know, experienced this myself, a very similar cultural kind of moral panic, which this feels like, back when I was at the Fifth Estate, and we did 2 big documentaries exposing satanic ritual abuse, multiple personality disorder, and recovered memories, which were all connected in a big blob of bad choices by the professional bodies governing these organizations of psychiatrists and psychologists. And what was happening in the gist of what was happening is that women would go into a psychologist's office saying, I feel depressed. And they'd come out, if it was a psychologist who believed in this nonsense, they would come out believing they'd been sexually abused by their families and a satanic cult connected to the families that ate human babies, et cetera, and that they'd just forgotten all of it. Like, it happened over a period of 10 years. They didn't remember any of it because they had developed multiple personality to hold the memories, right? It was absurd. And what would happen in these cases, there was never any evidence to back up all of these murders that were happening, all of this abuse. There was never any physical evidence to back it up. And both academia, parts of academia, and the professions of psychology and psychiatry, many people were caught up in this. And only the people who really believed in it were diagnosing it. And they learned later that much of it was created by hypnosis in the therapist's office. And it was kind of overturned by malpractice lawsuits, right? And that may happen with the trans ideology in the end. There is a case in Canada of a young woman suing over her transition. So when I latched onto this, I've told this story before on the show, but I just want people to understand this is not the first time cult-like belief in a stupid idea has overtaken a profession. We just saw it with COVID, by the way, didn't we? Same thing. So I understood very well once I dove into it what was going on, and that made Chris Elston's work even more important, because when he started, there was not very many people were sticking up for kids and talking about the dangers of pushing this ideology on them. So he is going to talk to us today in a minute about what it's been like for the last few years. And I will play a little bit of my interview with him the morning after he was attacked and badly beaten up in Montreal. I don't know why Black Bloc and Antifa think that dipping their oar into this issue is somehow anti-fat. I don't know what these people are doing. They really need to be labeled a terrorist organization. Why do we put up with this garbage? We don't know who they are. They wear scuba gear and balaclavas, and they get away with beating people up, and everybody's going, well, not people I know, but people are going, oh, hooray. They're so like, oh, huh? We got to stop this too. They should be on some kind of a list, and they should be investigated in some way, in my view. And I don't say that, but they certainly do attack people, and they seem to get away with it. So that's another show. I'll have Andy No on to talk about that one day. But this happened in Montreal, so not good. So I want to get into the story of Chris's life and how he got started. But before we do that, I want to mention that there are days when I feel that people are waking up to this, and there are days when I feel we're all going backwards. It's really, really interesting. There's some movement. I know one of the Scandinavian countries is not doing the gender transition stuff on kids, the medical transitioning anymore. And that's a win. And that's in the win column, especially in Scandinavia, because the very first sex change was done, I think, in Denmark or something. So they're very progressive about these things over there, but they are pulling back. And I know in the UK they've pulled back too. They had a terrible time with the Tavistock clinic. But of course, in Canada and the United States, except for Florida and a few other places, they're merrily rolling along, doing what are euphemistically called top and bottom surgeries, which is mutilating kids, and giving them puberty blockers, for which we have no long-term data. And we do know they cause some harm. So why? Well, it is a cult, and we have to start standing up for kids. It's very, very, very hard to change the view of the people who've bought into this, but we must. History will not be kind to us, people. So before we get into the reporting today, I want to do just our pitch. And the pitch is that we are listener supported. And we do it mostly on Substack. We have a growing community there in the comment sections on the pieces that I post about a show we've just done. We're very, very grateful for that. Substack allows us to comment and report without any fear that we are going to be censored. And I did not have that liberty on Patreon, so we're moving off Patreon. So grateful for our Patreon subscribers, but nudge over to over to our Substack. And we're starting to do premium content too for our paying subscribers, and happy to do that too. So I also have a website, which is trishwoodpodcast.com. And I have a merch store, and it has some really fun stuff. We're going to put more merch in soon. But we do have a lovely walk down memory lane for the truckers. We have still some great trucker hats, and we should all wear those proudly, regardless of what the POEC says, because we know that's nonsense, don't we? And we heard that from Ray McGinnis last week, right? Or week before last. So I would be grateful. I know that there's a lot of indie media out there, and we support them all in our hearts. And I actually have quite a few paid subscription to various people whose work I admire. That's just the way it's going to have to be. Legacy media isn't dying. It is dead. And if the coverage of the convoy and the POEC and the absolutely garbage conclusions it came to, not based on fact, contradicted by the facts in the report, if those things don't convince you that legacy media is dead, well, hello, wake up in there. So you should be listening to people like Matt Taibbi and Glenn Greenwald and me, I hope. And you're just going to have to you should be thinking about the idea that we need to pay for our indie media now in order to be well informed, because they're just lying to us all. That's what they're doing. They're lying. So I'm going to get to the Chris interview in a minute, but I want to give you a flavor of what is happening out there. Minnesota Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan gave a little speech recently about parenting with children who want to change their gender. And she says, when our children tell us who they are, it's our job as grown-ups to listen and believe them, right? So if your child tells you that they're a teddy bear, we have to believe that. I mean, it's insane. But I want you to listen, because her conviction here is very, very illustrative of the cult-like nature, the religious nature of believing in this against all facts to the contrary. So here she is.
Because let's be clear, this is life-affirming and life-saving healthcare. When our children tell us who they are, it is our job as grown-ups to listen and to believe them. That's what it means to be a good parent.
You should seek that clip out on the internet. It's on Twitter somewhere, and look at her face as she's speaking. It's extraordinary. Interestingly, that's posted on Twitter. That's where I found it. And Elon Musk, God bless him, he's kind of knocking it out of the park, isn't he? He says, not when they're fed propaganda by adults. Moreover, every child goes through an identity crisis before their personality identity crystallizes. Therefore, we shouldn't allow severe, irreversible surgery or sterilizing drugs that they may regret until at least age 18. Go, Elon. Isn't that great? And he's absolutely right about that. I mean, lots of the kids who are former kids who are now detransitioning were finding out they were gay, that they were merely tomboys. Some of them had autism. Some of them were just confused. Some of them wanted to be cool. Some of them were already drug addicted. Many of them have borderline personality disorder, which is not a personality that's so mild it's borderline. It's a stupid name because it feels that way, but that's not actually what it means. Most people with borderline personality are kind of hysterical. They are sometimes suicidal, and they also are what we call cutters, right? These children, teenagers, some adults too, who cut themselves with razor blades. That's not an uncommon feature of the kids who are claiming that they're trans now. And what we have to understand is that the trans ideology is being shoved down their throats at school and all over social media. And so for kids who are struggling, and let's face it, many of them are right now because they live on screens. They've just been locked out of school here in Ontario, Canada, wow, for so long. Their friendships are fractured. They have high anxiety. And the trans identity is being portrayed everywhere as cool. You're special, you're sprinkled with fairy dust. You get bright colored rainbows. And who wouldn't want that? And for sure, you see the teachers who push this making the trans kids feel really, really special, as if untrans kids are not, right? So of course they gravitate toward that. Of course they do. It doesn't mean they're trans. It means they want to be special. And you see, there is this character named Dylan, I think it's Dylan Mulvaney, he was invited to the White House, which really kind of fried me off because he is a trans person whose identity is, in my view, as an old feminist, as an old TERF, is kind of, how can I put it? It's like old school feminism, right? It's like 1950s feminism. And that is part of what happens in this milieu. There are some trans people, like Caitlyn Jenner, who just dress like normal women, right? They're just normal people who feel that they are another gender or however it plays out for them, and they go on about their lives, not bothering anybody. Dylan Mulvaney, how can I put this? He pulls all of the terrible stereotypes and tropes about women into this persona he's created. Women are ditzy, women are clumsy, women are stupid, women are fragile. All of these things we don't want our daughters to think about themselves. And these are the tropes and stereotypes that many of these trans stars like Dylan Mulvaney are doing. And it's offensive to me. I will say it. It's like blackface. We're not allowed, and nor should we, wear blackface. But these extreme portrayals of women they're insulting to us. I never had a problem with drag, by the way, just to say. I used to go to drag shows myself late at night, when the bars closed. It was adult entertainment. It was fun. They looked great. And I would say, wow, and they were doing kind of extreme female stuff, but it was a show, right? They were like showgirls. Pretending that you are a woman by being a ditz who's trying to kind of deep fake Audrey Hepburn, and by the way, failing, but using the tropes of 1950s women from which we have thrown off the shackles, people. We're not ditzy, we're not stupid, we're not weak. But that's what he's doing. I find it really offensive. I find him really offensive, and I find it offensive that he was invited to the White House. So that's what we're fighting against. I want to play for you now, just before we get into the interview with Chris Elston. Oh no, let me make it. So the other thing we need to know about Canada here, because a lot of what we see on the internet is about the American kind of trans ideological debate, right? So we passed Bill C-6, and it was interesting watching how the New York Times covered this. This is a bill that was tabled ostensibly to ban conversion therapy, which is a bad thing. You don't want to force gay people into trying to be straight. That can't happen. Gay people are gay, and that's it, and we should leave them alone. But what they've snuck in there is a caveat about children and gender, and gender specifically, and that is if someone in this country goes in to see a professional and they feel they might be transgender, no investigation of that claim is allowed. So people are diagnosing themselves, and they're diagnosing themselves in an environment of massive, massive propaganda towards that idea. So if somebody walks into a doctor's office and says, I have a lump on my neck, it's cancer, they don't automatically do a biopsy, or they don't automatically do cancer surgery. They do a biopsy first, right? In psychology and psychiatry today, you cannot investigate why a young person may feel that way. You have to affirm. It's called gender affirming care. But the claim of what gender they are is coming from kids frequently who've been indoctrinated at school. It's insane. Like, it's anti-logic. It's cult-like, as I keep saying. And the Canadian schools are in on it too. I'm reading from something called the Canadian Gender Report. And if you care about this, you should be subscribing to them. It's a website with quite good reporting. An article in Canada's National Post last week explored how children can socially transition their gender at school without the knowledge of their parents. The article received more than 1,000 comments, most of them highly critical of the policy to keep a child's gender change a secret from the parents. This practice in schools is becoming common policy, the article noted. It's just one way the education system has become intimately involved in the transgender process, which affects an exponentially growing number of young Canadians. So this is scary. This is very, very scary. Cutting the parents out? What are you talking about? What are you we're the people who know them best. We're the people who have their best interests at heart, and these woke, captured teachers think they know better. This is the road to tyranny and authoritarianism, when our schools are having more control over our children than we do. It's absolutely shocking. This bill was passed with the full or nearly full support of the Conservative Party, who could have been an opposition force here. And of course they weren't. And there's a nice big picture of Aaron O'Toole shaking Trudeau's hand on this. What a bunch of cowards. Really, this is how politics works. It's like, what way is the wind blowing today? And instead of actually doing the deep dive research on this, which politicians should do but don't, except Ron DeSantis, they go along because they don't want to be accused of being transphobic. And I'm going to say this, and then we're going to go into our interview with Chris. Sorry, I've been banging on so long about it. There's so much to say about this. It's actually like a 6-part series or something, which maybe I'll do. But if someone calls you transphobic for pointing out factual points about what's going on with children and the push to change their gender and convince them there are 100 genders or whatever and change it's all insane, right? If anybody accuses you of being transphobic about opposing that, this is what you say. And it's what I say about racism too. You say, I am meeting you citizen to citizen, with an open heart, and we're going to respect each other. But I don't believe that. And I am not transphobic. And we have to accept that about each other. That's what you say. You fight back. Don't accept it. Because as long as we are afraid to call out nonsense out of the risk of being labeled one of their stupid labels, we're sunk. We have to stop it. And I will bet you Aaron O'Toole, gutless Aaron O'Toole, was afraid of being labeled transphobic instead of sticking up for our children, right? Yeah, we're kind of sunk here. We need leaders. We need leadership. And I think Ron DeSantis he's certainly leading the way on this, other places too, but he's just a guy, and how does Ron DeSantis get away with it? You know how he gets away with it? He does his research and he knows he's right. And then he's not afraid to talk about it, right? He'll take it on. So let's now hear what happened to Chris Elston. He was in Montreal with his sandwich board, wandering around saying children can't consent to puberty blockers. And he was jumped by some people. It was an awful, awful event. Yeah, this is what happened.
She doesn't out of here. Get the out of this neighborhood.
Go.
Go, Chris. Go, Chris.
Yeah.
Get the out of here.
Go.
Transphobes. Up. Out.
You leaving?
Hey. Yeah. Leave then. Turn the around and leave. Get the out of here. Careful! Right? Am I bleeding?
That was kind of unpleasant to hear. It was a bad night for Chris, for sure. And I do believe his arm was broken or something like that, quite serious. So the next day after that event, I interviewed him on my show about what happened. And here is a clip of how he sounded. He was very, very shaken up.
Well, I have two little girls. They're 9 and 11. Excuse me. Sorry, I'm just emotional this morning. I just became aware of all the issues that are happening. Absolutely none of this is about bigotry or hate. I want to make that very clear. I have no issues with adults doing whatever they please, but as I've been doing this, I've talked to so many parents, probably hundreds of parents now, whose children are socially transitioning or then physically transitioning even without parental approval. And this ideology is in all of our schools. There are young girls in every single school in Canada, basically, that are now transitioning and more wanting to do so all the time. Children are coming to harm. It's just that simple. And parents are powerless to stop it. So I just felt compelled to speak out because our media won't report on anything. And everyone's afraid of the violence, which they should be because it's scary. But if we're not allowed to have conversations, if the media won't report on it, I put up a billboard. It got taken down the next day that said, "I heart J.K. Rowling." And sorry, I never do this. I never get emotional like this, but we have thousands of children coming to harm. So in my estimation, this is the medical scandal of the last century, and it's going 100 miles an hour in the wrong direction. I just felt compelled to make a stand. That's really all it is.
Wow. He was clearly in some form of shock there too. You know, he'd just been attacked the night before. What a brave guy. And this is the medical scandal of our lifetime, folks. It really is. It's something we just can't continue to accept. And, it's also, as I said, it's indicative of the capture of medicine and science and psychology and psychiatry in a way that's just completely, completely irrational. The other thing I just want to say before we go into the interview with Chris is that he and I don't agree on one point. I said women are being thrown under the bus in this movement, and I believe that very strongly. And he counters by saying women are at the forefront of pushing this. And in a sense, they are, with the sort of the captured moms, transitioning kids, and these odd cohort of young white women, these university students who are aggressively pushing this. But my position on that, just to clarify, because you'll hear us going back and forth, is that aside, the transgender movement is at its core, and I'm not talking about the very small number of people who actually have body dysmorphia. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about these extremists, many of whom have autogynephilia, which means it's a fetish. They are anti-women, and you hear the way they go after women. You know, we're TERFs. They want to chop our heads off. There were signs about putting us to the guillotine. Women who protest this are often attacked by Antifa and threatened with death threats, as J.K. Rowling has been. So I think there was a bit of a misunderstanding, but I do believe there's a huge amount of misogyny driving this. These extreme trans activists actually hate women. And so I'm not sure if I was making myself clear with him. But anyway, I don't agree with everything all my guests say. So there you go. So here's my interview with Chris Elston, also known as Billboard Chris. Hi, Chris. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic, Trish. Thank you so much for having me.
Happy to. You just got back from somewhere. I saw a picture on your Twitter timeline of you flying, I guess it was over the Rocky Mountains from somewhere. Where were you coming from?
Yeah, I was actually coming from Ohio. I was one day in Columbus, Ohio, meeting Vivek Ramaswamy, the presidential candidate.
Yeah, great.
But I was really in DC for about a week. I was at CPAC in Washington, DC. Then I had some meetings. And then on the way home, I stopped in Ohio to brief Vivek about all this business of child transition. And we recorded a podcast. So that was fantastic. Huge honor for me. It's the first podcast he's recorded. And he's running for president. And he's a really cool guy. So I was very honored to be part of that.
Yeah, he does seem like a very cool guy. I have my eye on him. Because he says things I sort of agree with. I don't know. I think the Republican Party he's going to run as a Republican, right? I'm assuming. Yeah. I don't know. They might be mean to him, but they're so corrupt. The whole thing is corrupt in there, but we'll see what happens. So,
yeah, he might be too smart and young and truthful for a lot of the establishment, but they need someone like that. He's a super smart guy, extremely sharp. He's campaigning really on a lot of this anti-woke business.
Yeah.
I prefer not to use the word anti, just pro-reality, pro-truth.
Yeah.
He's not afraid to tell some of the things that people are afraid to talk about. So we need someone like that.
Yeah. Like I said, I've had my eye on him for a while. I think he's really, really smart, and he just says things. I've come to really admire people who just say stuff. They don't pussyfoot around. They just say it. It's good. So I'm glad he had you on. It feels to me like you're kind of busting out a bit. It's funny when someone breaks through after a long time of working on a project. It's kind of a wonderful thing to see that you're getting attention finally.
For me, it feels different because I live this every day. So there's all sorts of things that have been happening for a long time that I'm acutely aware of that the average person watching might not be. And I feel like I've always been winning and making huge progress the entire time. But when you start with no platform at all, and you're just a normie, you're just a dad from the suburbs like me, it's different than someone who has a platform already. They can break through a lot quicker. But even when no one was in media was paying attention to anything I was doing, I felt I was making breakthroughs every day because I was talking to a lot of people on the street, and I was helping parents individually to learn what was going on. So then they're able to protect their kids. And if that's all I ever did, I was happy with myself. But especially when I started going into the States in November of 2021, that's when I started to pick up more traction with media and podcasters and working with organizations down south, because there are no organizations fighting this in Canada.
Yeah.
None. I could probably name 10 people who are fighting this at all. Not one conservative politician, of course, will speak out against any of this. But in the States, there are a lot of organizations fighting this. And back in November 2021, I was in Texas on my first trip. And I just hung out with this woman named Carrie Smith. She has a pretty big podcast. We'd been out on the streets in Texas, just hanging out, having a great time. And that night I joined a Twitter space where you can talk to people on Twitter.
Yep.
These were pretty new back then. And I saw this account named Moms for Liberty, and I thought, that's a good name. And they were talking about education, which is a big issue for me. So I joined this space. And it was the co-founder, Tiffany Justice, speaking. And she's an incredible woman who, back on January 21st, along with her co-founder, Tina Deskovich, started this organization, Moms for Liberty, just the two of them. They had both been school board members for 4 years previously. And by the time I talked to her, when was that? The end of 2021, they'd already had about 60,000 moms join. Now they're double that. And we hit it off right away. So I've been working with them. I've been talking to different chapters of Moms for Liberty around the country. I've made friends with this other organization called the Independent Women's Forum, which also has, way north of 100,000 members. They've been around longer. They're extremely influential in conservative circles.
That's Tammy Bruce, isn't it? Isn't that her organization, Tammy Bruce and those people?
I'm not sure about Tammy. I think you're probably right, though.
Yeah, I think so.
But my contact there mainly is a woman named Ginny Gentles, who's worked on Capitol Hill her whole life. And so March of last year, almost a year ago exactly, I met with probably 40 different people from around the United States at the Heritage Foundation, which is the most influential conservative think tank in the U.S. and they write model legislation for states to plug in legislation. And so they've gotten very active in fighting this. And that meeting came together just because I happened to be going to DC, and Tiffany Justice and Ginny Gentles had found out about that. So they contacted Jay Richards, who's leading up the charge against gender ideology at Heritage, and they brought all these people together. So this is a long-winded story, but that was huge because I made friends with many of these most important people in the States who are fighting this. And we've been making big strides for a while now collectively. And I think the biggest thing that's happened during my campaign were these videos that I tweeted out from Boston Children's Hospital last August. These were their own videos that their gender clinic had produced. And this is the top-ranked pediatric hospital in the country, and they're saying crazy things like a sign that your child is transgender is when they play with opposite gender toys. Or if a little girl wants to pee standing up, or a little boy doesn't want to get a haircut. These are all a sign your child is transgender. And they had all these videos they produced, which to anyone with half a brain are instantly just incredible to watch, because these are the doctors at the top-ranked children's hospital in the country saying and doing the most absurd things, evil things to children. And I had a feeling they were going to delete these videos because they made themselves look so bad. So I recorded them all, and sure enough, they deleted every single one. But I've got all these videos, and they've been very instrumental in waking up the whole conservative movement. And these videos and the viral nature of them, they started a wave of all these conservative media and podcasters looking into this, other people investigating other children's hospitals. And now in just 6 or 7 months where we had no one talking about this, we now have about 20 different states passing legislation, and the whole world is waking up. So yeah, there have been a lot of breakthroughs.
A lot of breakthroughs. I think those videos are what maybe inspired Matt Walsh too. Was that the catalyst for him doing his documentary, What is Woman?
No, his documentary had already been done.
Oh, had it? Okay.
He's been talking about this really when Biden got elected. He started talking a lot more. Tucker Carlson started talking a lot more about it.
It's so weird that this is considered a conservative issue, that people on the left are all for mutilating children. I mean, right? It's just, it's so kind of, I used to be on the left. And if I were still on the left, this is the issue that would make me leave the left, because it's indefensible, right? I want to talk to you a little bit about the doctors who are doing this, because it's kind of inexplicable, right? I mean, people don't go into medicine to end up doing terrible things. And, it feels a bit like a cult or something, that that they're brainwashed, or something is preventing them from actually seeing what they're doing. What do you think about that?
Yeah, so a couple points. It's only the Democrat politicians, really, who refuse to acknowledge reality. The people on the street aren't having this. And I have Democrats, lifelong Democrats, who come out on the street with me all the time, moms and dads, who are not okay with any of this. So my message with these politicians has always been, what are you waiting for? This is such a winning issue. You can't lose. Just tell the truth.
Yeah, but let me just stop you there, Chris, to say this. I mean, that may be the case, but I'm sorry. Biden was, elected, right? So, I mean, the midterms did not go as well for the Republicans as they should. So you may have a lot of women, mothers saying, oh, I completely disagree with that. But as long as they're still voting for Democrats, they're going to get it. So it kind of bugs me that people are not, that they're saying things, but they're still voting in this hypnotized way for people who would do this to children. Right.
Well, so the last election goes back to 2020. Yeah. So a lot of people had never heard of this issue back in November 2020. And of course, people don't vote just on one issue. People are leaving the party. And when it comes to the Democrats in the political class, it's the radical left who have taken over that party completely for all things. You can't tell me that Nancy Pelosi doesn't know what a woman is, but she won't speak up against any of this because she knows if she does, she'll get canceled by her own party. And the worst thing a Democrat ever wants to be called is a bigot or anti-LGBT. They use these four letters together to silence any discussion. Because even though this transgender business has nothing to do with LGB, they link them all together. And that's one reason they've had so much success, is conflating these two issues.
Yeah.
But anyway, as for these doctors, you're absolutely right. This is like a cult, and doctors are not immune to cultish ideologies at all. They're people just like everybody else. And I go to all these university campuses and I hang out and I have conversations and I start 1,000 conversations. The whole campus ends up talking about it. Take, for example, a young woman who is going into med school, and she's 21 years old right now, and she's taken her gender studies classes, and all the young women in these universities are going along with this because it's seen as being social justice. It's loving, it's kind. This is the sales pitch, and it preys on their natural nurturing nature and their empathy. And these kids are being taught this propaganda that this is helping a child to be who they really are, and if we don't transition them, they'll kill themselves. So you got these young people who have fallen for this ideology, but some of them are going to go into med school. Just because they go into med school doesn't mean they're suddenly going to snap out of this cultish ideology.
Yeah.
They're going to do their different courses, and these courses themselves now have been captured by this ideology. You have at University of British Columbia, they're taught not to refer to them as breastfeeders anymore. They're chest feeders.
Oh, I can't even.
This stuff's just everywhere.
I just can't.
But
I can't even.
But, you know, some of them are going to be ideologically sold. Yeah. And then they'll become doctors, and they'll choose this specialty. Just like we see teachers who want to trans children. It makes them feel special, like they're saving these kids, like they think they're helping them to be who they really are. But they're just really indoctrinated. And yeah, you get that, but you also just have the existence of good and evil in the world, I believe. And this is pure evil, because trying to change the sex of a child and all the things that they're doing to these kids, you can't just say that, oh, you were given guidance by your medical body, or you thought this was the right thing. Anyone with half a brain and any semblance of conscience knows right away how wrong this is. So these doctors shouldn't be let off the hook just because the American Academy of Pediatrics has said that this is the standard of care.
Well, it does feel somewhat criminal to me. And I've said before, I had Kara Dansky on, and also the woman who writes the 11th Hour blog, Jennifer Bilek, who's terrific.
Jennifer
Bilek.
Yeah.
And the other thing that may happen here is what happened during the satanic ritual abuse, false memory syndrome, multiple personality disorder epidemic that never was. That was also created by zealous psychotherapists caught in a cult-like way of thinking about child sexual abuse. That ended because people started suing for malpractice, right? And the insurance company shut it down pretty quickly. It was kind of interesting. It was the natural evolution of it. The people who'd been pushing it didn't say, oh, we were wrong. It just ended because they couldn't afford to get insurance for their practices, which was exactly right. They shouldn't, So I wonder if that might happen here. I know there's a case in Ontario now of a young woman who's suing for malpractice over being transitioned. And maybe that will put an end to it.
Yeah. Well, the thing with North America is we have 60 different jurisdictions, 50 states, 10 provinces, all with their own medical boards. And you have to fix this in each jurisdiction. Now, we do have some other lawsuits happening. We have Chloe Cole down in California. She's a girl who at 13 years of age was put on testosterone. At 15, she had a double mastectomy. And she's suing. Her lawyer is Harmeet Dillon, who just ran for the chair of the RNC, the Republican National Committee. She lost, and she would have been great, but Chloe's suing, so that'll be fantastic. We have the medical board in Florida conducted an investigation into this, and they invited doctors from the American Academy of Pediatrics, American Medical Association to come and speak, and guess what? They refused to.
Of course.
Why would they do that? They know
it's indefensible.
As soon as they have a conversation about this.
Yeah, it's indefensible. Well, we saw that, and this is a good thing about Matt Walsh's doc for me, was that people who were engaged in this could not defend themselves. So he'd ask them an absolutely legitimate question. And the go-to response was, I'm ending the interview. You're transphobic, or something like that. They could never engage on the facts. It was always like, what? You can't ask me that question. And then they would just sort of shut it down. It was a very, very interesting phenomenon because he was quite gentle. He wasn't rude to people. But they couldn't accept a factual basis for criticism of what they were doing. Their frontal lobes were rejecting it or something. It was really, really strange.
Yeah. This is a religious movement.
Yeah.
For all practical purposes, that's how people need to view this. When he's talking to these people, he literally never offered an opinion that entire movie. He just asked questions. It's like the Socratic method of debate where you ask questions to these people to get them thinking. That's what I do a lot of the time when I'm on the street. I've been doing this for 2.5 years, having 10, 11,000 conversations out on the street now. When people come at me with any hostility, I don't try to change their mind, because you can't do that with these people when they're in that mindset. I simply say something that they agree with. Like, first of all, I don't think we should be putting these kids in some stereotypical box. If a girl's more masculine, if a boy's more effeminate, what's wrong with that? And I'll just pause. And they're so confused because their preconception, their prejudice is that I'm supposed to be some bigot against gender nonconformity. And I've just said that there's no right way to be a boy or a girl, because there isn't. Yeah. And so in that moment, I've created this cognitive dissonance where they have two competing ideas going on in their head, and they're going to have to go home and make sense out of those, because you can't have two existing ideas in your head simultaneously that don't correspond.
No.
Or I'll ask them questions. I'll say, what does it mean to be a transgender child? What does it mean for a girl to be a boy? How does that work? And you know what? No one can tell me. Because of course they can't. There is no answer. Not one person can give me a definition for what gender identity is without resorting to sexist stereotypes. Because ultimately that's all this ideology comes down to. The body positive message we should be sending is that if a girl wants to climb trees and play in the dirt and wear pants and wants short hair, well, she's a 100% beautiful girl.
Yeah.
There's no right way to be a girl or a boy. But these people they agree with that statement. They agree that stereotypes are bad, but they don't see, they have this blind spot that they're pushing stereotypes to such a degree that if a child doesn't conform to them, that we should now alter their body so that they match the stereotypes associated with the opposite sex or whatever.
Well,
totally.
I think for women like myself who are offended by most of it, that's kind of hitting the nail on the head, because what's the guy's name? Is it Dylan Mulvaney? What's his name? The guy who was invited to the White House.
That's right.
Right. So he's got these YouTube channels, whatever he's doing, social media posts and things. And what he does when he is portraying women is it's offensive to me in a sense. It's like we're bimbos, we walk ridiculously, we're clumsy when we're in the woods, we're afraid of bugs, it's an awful old-fashioned 1950s stereotype. And that seems to be very much, not with everybody, but very much with the kind of prominent ones, what they're doing. And for me as a woman, it feels like blackface. Right. It feels like like drag is kind of blackface, but when it was confined to late night nightclubs, everybody kind of winked and nudged and straight women accepted it because it was kind of all in good fun. Right. But now that they're doing those stereotypes and also accusing us of being monsters who deserve to have our throats slit, as one prominent trans writer said about women who question what they're doing, I really do see it as a kind of blackface misogyny. I do. And I think that there's something really ugly behind it, something really woman-hating behind it.
Yeah. I mean, what's the difference? Why can't we wear blackface, but we can wear woman face? What's the difference?
Yeah.
I don't get it.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what the difference is. The difference is, here's what my take on it, Chris. Women are still the bottom of the barrel behind. every other identity group, right? Women are still at the bottom. Like, imagine defending a guy who goes into a woman's change room with teenage girls in there and is strutting around with his junk hanging out and no one defending those girls. What world are we living? That's sexual assault where I come from. And I don't care how he identifies, it's sexual assault. And I think that if he actually were like a well-meaning trans person, he would have sensitivity about that, right? He would say, well, maybe I'm going to use that change room, but maybe I'll change in the bathroom so I'm not freaking people out, right? That's what a decent person does. But flashing around in there it does bespeak this autogynephilia that everybody's very worried about. And it seems to attend the trans people who are the most aggressive in their hatred of women.
So social media is not real life, and we focus on the most outlandish characters of all. I don't know if I would agree that women are at the bottom of the barrel. You know who's pushing this the most? Women. Now, they might not be the most rich funders of this going back in time, but more than 90% of the hate I get on the street is from young women. If you look at the counter protests that I've had against me, they're 95% women. These two women, smart women, were just launching a book in New York yesterday, and these counter protesters came and threw things at them and called them terrible names, and they were all young white women.
Well, let me just say that's a special subset, though. I know exactly the white women you're talking about, right? These are the ones.
But this is a large subset, though.
No, I understand that, Chris. I'm just saying I know who they are. I know what it is. It's the girls who are at the front of the Black Lives Matter movement. They stand, these white girls, they stand there. Yeah, I understand it. And I think those are young women who've been kind of indoctrinated at university, so they don't see actually that this is anti-woman, right? So I would disagree with you that I think technically you're right to say that women are pushing this, and certainly these mothers who want to trans their kids and make videos on TikTok about it. I get it.
Yeah, it's almost all moms.
It's almost all moms, but both things can be true.
Yeah.
You know, the fact that society accepts it, right, doesn't mean that women are still.
100%.
No one's defending us. No one is like a culture that is going to let a 16-year-old girl on a sports team share a changing room with a guy, a 6-foot guy who's claiming to be female with his junk hanging out. This is a society that hates women, right? They're preferring the trans person.
But it's not a society that hates women, though. That's so. We can go back and forth here, and I think we probably agree. No one's down with this. This is an extremely small percentage of the population. It's less than 10%. As soon as you're able to have any sort of conversation with these people, you'll narrow it down even more. But this has been pushed, starting in academia. We're going to get way too long here if we get into this whole thing. This idea that gender is a social construct emanates originally really from feminist circles, and this thing has taken on a life of its own. But I don't think we have a society at all that hates women. I think this is predominantly pushed by academia and young women. And if this were any other era in human history, this wouldn't have lasted at all, because people harming kids like they would have just been taken care of. Yeah. But if anyone speaks out against this, they lose their jobs or they go to jail. Dads are going to jail. People say, where are the men? Well, there are men going to jail.
Yeah.
To stop this. Rob Hoogland went to jail. Jeff Younger has spent $1 million in the state of Texas to try to stop his wife from transitioning his kid. And now she's taking the kid to California, where she's not going to have any problems, because they just introduced a new law where they made California a sanctuary state for this transition of children. A child can run away from home from New York City to California, and California will refuse to return the child home if parents don't want to transition the child. A non-custodial spouse or someone in a custody agreement can kidnap the child, bring them to California to transition the kid, and California will ignore custody agreements, arrest warrants, subpoenas, court orders. It's totally outrageous, but I mean, yes, tons of women are pushing against this. Tons of women are also pushing it. We're waking up parents. I've always believed that it was parents who were going to put a stop to this, because there's no love in this world like a parent has for their child.
Yeah.
But they've captured all these left-wing institutions throughout North America, especially. And we just have to keep having these conversations and getting the truth out there, because this has been a psychological operation or a cult that's been growing for a long time, and they've had a lot of money behind them, but we have the truth behind them, and we're going to get it out there. We have the truth behind us.
Yeah. So I want to talk to, we'll agree maybe to disagree a little bit about that, but I take your point. I do. I guess I'll just say this and we'll move on. But when I say that women are kind of at the bottom on this, what I mean is that, you know, as far as the state is concerned, and we've seen that in the UK, and we've certainly seen it, you know, in North America too, that the state is defending the men claiming to be women over women saying we don't want to deal with them in our spaces, right? So the tribunals and the courts, there was a woman in the UK who was arrested for misgendering somebody on Twitter, you know, and I think the woman in that what is it, the health spa or something in California who had freaked out.
The wee spa,
like she was not getting support from the police either. You know, that's what I'm saying. So I'm saying the state.
I think that goes just more to the whole ideology, though. I mean, men aren't going to care about women in their spaces or women in their sports,
right?
Because it's just not a threat, and it's not an issue. But it's not just because they're women that they're being ignored. It's the ideology as a whole. No one dares to speak against the ideology. This ideology is particularly terrible for women.
Yeah.
But it's just that ideology that no one dares to speak against.
Yeah. Well,
I don't think it's just because it's women. Like it's gay men are having a hard time too because of this.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just obviously women need to be protected from crazy, mentally ill, bad men. Yes. And they're not all autogynephiles either, where they have this condition where they get aroused by the idea of being a woman. Some of them are just bad men who are obviously going to take advantage of a system where they can say they're a woman and they're acknowledged as a woman, and then no one can do anything. But it's the left that's pushing this, and it's primarily leftist women who are pushing this, and people need to understand this, because we can't solve a problem if we don't diagnose who the foot soldiers are.
Yeah.
And instead of just complaining about men, we need to reach these young women. This is why I talk about this. It's not about blame.
Well, we need to reach
what the problem is.
We need to reach those young women on a whole bunch of stuff, right? And, you know, because they're captured in many, many ways that are not, in my view, particularly healthy. I guess the other thing, just stick with us for a second, is how on social, and this is a social media play, probably what I'm talking about, but when there are women at the demos at these various, especially in Scotland, as I understood, there was some before Nicola Sturgeon, you know, had the good sense to resign. The women who go to these protests are called terrible things and have their lives threatened, and nobody ever goes after the trans people making the threats, right? They don't arrest them,
right?
You know, and so that's another reason I say that women are not valued in this argument either. We cannot go to a protest without being threatened, and no one's arresting the people on social media saying literally that we need to have our throats cut. There were signs saying, you know, they wanted to chop women's heads off who were protesting. I mean, that's what I mean. And that's how I feel about it. It's my feeling as a woman, I guess. Maybe technically you're correct that there are women. I know there are women pushing it, but as a straight woman who's not pushing it, I also feel that my opinion about my gender and my sex is not valued anymore. Right. And you see it with the, you know, selling tampons to trans, like, it's just, they're trying, I feel, Chris, like they're trying to erase us. That's maybe where my feeling is coming from. Hershey just jumped on board. They just gave a prize for some women's prize on Women's Day to a trans person. You know, I just feel like nobody cares about women anymore. So maybe it's just my response to living in a world that is so quickly embracing this really, really toxic ideology that I think devalues us women. That's my.
Yeah, I think the vast majority of the population completely value women. People don't know how to fight this.
Well, why?
They don't know how to fight this because all of the powers that be are against them if they push back on this, and they'll lose their job and everything.
Why is Hershey's doing it though, Chris? Tell me why. Why are the corporations jumping? This is something I'm sure you and Vivek talked about because he hates woke capitalism, right? So why is Hershey's doing this? Why are tampon companies pitching to men? I mean, it's ridiculous. Why are they doing it?
Money? It's a great question. It's people in their organizations who have bought into this ideology. I mean, I'm sure if we ultimately looked into this, if you pull that string far enough, you're going to find some money somewhere.
Yeah.
But why does Disney push this? Disney has a bunch of woke employees and woke people running the company. They don't have to push this. It's not good for their stock price. It's not good for their box office receipts. But this is a religion that has captured especially the younger segment of the population.
Yes.
And these young people get out of university. And again, it is mostly women who are buying into this. The men are not buying this. I have not had one. And I've been out on the street for more than 2,000 hours.
Wow.
This is a true statement. I've not had one big, strong, athletic male in 2.5 years have a problem with me.
Yeah, no, I know. I know what you're saying. It's true.
So these young social justice warriors, this thing is just a neat trick. It preys on the natural empathy of women, and it weaponizes it. Well, they come out of university, they become the teachers and the social workers and the counselors and the people working in these HR departments. And in a relatively short period of time, they've managed to change corporate culture. I mean, how did ESG capture Wall Street? Wall Street is about capitalism. It's about making money. And then they bring in this environmental social governance business where now they're looking after stakeholders instead of shareholders. Stakeholders meaning anyone who has an interest in the company.
Yeah.
This is essentially communism taking over Wall Street.
Yeah.
So it's just the left makes everything upside down. They present it as beautiful and loving and kind when it's always the exact opposite. So, I mean, it's such a huge question you just asked. Why is it all happening? There's a variety of reasons. There's many national corporations, multinational corporations, the WHO, the World Economic Forum, the UN, all these organizations, all these traditional leftist organizations have been captured by this and they're pushing it. So who knows about Hershey's? There could be some employee at Hershey's that thought this was a good idea and they get to present themselves as being socially virtuous and people sign off on it.
I think part of it in the corporate world, because BlackRock is kind of pushing this stuff too, right? Massive BlackRock, scary BlackRock. And I did look at looked at their leadership and their board of governors or whatever. And they're all like white men. There's a couple women, maybe, I think there might have been some brown skinned guy. But so what they do, I actually think they think that pushing the woke ideology externally inoculates them from scrutiny internally. So they can keep doing what they're doing. And as long as they're saying all the right things and doing all the right virtue signals, they're going to get left alone and nobody's going to attack. That is almost to a corporation. If we looked at Hershey's right now and Googled who was running Hershey's, I bet they don't have a trans person. I bet they probably don't have a black person, right? So they do all this stuff, I think, so people will just leave them alone and think they're great. And it's easier than, actually believing in what they say. And the youth, I think it is the youth. I think we've got a problem with this generation coming out of university that we're going to have to deal with at some point, with a massive kind of critical thinking, deprogramming thing. I don't know how we do it, but we're going to have to figure it out. So I guess what I'm saying, Chris, is that it appears that these corporations that are spewing this kind of ideological bent in their products and advertising are maybe just trying to protect themselves from having the fickle finger pointing in their direction. That's how it seems anyway. It doesn't seem like they're credibly embracing anything. So I want to talk about you. That's really why you're here, but you're so interesting. We went off on some tangents, but I want people to really know you. And that is that you kind of became Billboard Chris because you were responding to something. Tell me how you got the idea to do what you started off doing. What was the catalyst for you?
The real catalyst is that my main job in life and my greatest joy in life is that of being a dad. And I've got 2 girls, and maybe one day we could go into a long form interview about everything that led up to this, but I'm not going to send my girls into a world that doesn't know what a woman is. I'm not going to live in a society that is trying to change the sex of children with chemical castration drugs, opposite sex hormones, doing surgeries on precious, innocent kids. It just didn't sit with me to do nothing. And so we've talked a bit about woke indoctrination and the rise of that in the world today. That all bothers me a lot. And I just don't like the direction that society's heading in. But this is the most toxic and unbelievable issue of all. And freedom of speech is important to me too. So in July of 2020, this woman in England had put up a poster that said, "I love J.K. Rowling," at the Edinburgh train station, and it got taken down because some people on Twitter complained that it was hate speech.
Wow.
And so what? We can't even put up a sign now that says, "I love the world's greatest children's author, J.K. Rowling."
Yeah.
So I followed her lead, and I tried to reach out to her. I couldn't contact her. I didn't want to upset her by copying her, but I put up a big billboard in Vancouver that said the same thing, and it got taken down after one day.
Wow. On what basis? What did they say?
So Sarah Kirby-Young, a woman, a Vancouver city councillor, said it was hate speech. And she pressured the sign company, and they took it down. Jimmy Patterson's company.
Wow. Shame on you, Jimmy Patterson. Yeah.
Yeah, so Jimmy doesn't know, I'm sure, because he's 94 years old every year.
Yeah.
And he's not involved in the day-to-day operations, but I met his goddaughter the other day. Small world, in Washington, D.C., and she's going to talk to him.
Oh, good.
About it.
Wow.
So who knows what'll come from that.
Yeah.
That would be amazing. Maybe he'll donate a bunch of billboards all across Canada for me.
I take that
because
back.
I know if I was able to sit down with him.
Yeah, I take that back. I take it back. Okay, good. We've got movement.
Yeah, it's the woke employees at the company.
Yeah.
So anyway, they took it down. I leveraged that into a little campaign, and I put up billboards all across the States. But I couldn't do anything in Canada. So I didn't have a choice but to do what I do. This is the only way I was able to reach people. I'm not a media guy. I don't have any platform. So my whole objective from even before the first billboard, I knew I was going to war, and I knew I was going to be at this for a long time, because I felt like the online discussions and the echo chambers that people exist in, and it was primarily just radical feminists talking about this back then. There were just a handful of men in the world talking about this. And I didn't think the dialogue was at all positive. They're just talking to each other. It was a lot of complaining and negativity, and that doesn't work. If you want to reach the masses, that does not work. There has to be optimism, there has to be positivity, and you've got to get outside of your echo chambers into the real world, like human to human. This is how we evolved. We evolved to talk to each other. And I know that the vast majority of the population is not okay with this. They just don't know about it. So you can't fix a problem when no one knows it exists. And I knew that if I just started enough conversations, that this would be the proverbial snowball rolling downhill. And as it gathers momentum, eventually it turns into an avalanche. And I think we're at that point in history right now where it is turning into an avalanche.
I agree.
And of course, this is not just me. This is all sorts of people talking about this. But for me, it was just a numbers game. There's 38 million people in Canada, and there's 350 or 60 million people in the US. And sure, I can only talk to one person at a time, but eventually media will pick it up, and podcasters and people like yourself, and events will happen where you reach millions. And it's just a matter of perseverance and belief and optimism, and we get there. So we're going to get there. This is too crazy to last, and it's working.
But let me just ask you this, because this is what I really am trying to understand. You've devoted the last 2.5 years of your life to this, almost singularly. You've been attacked physically as well. Probably some people thought you were nuts for doing it. Why?
Oh yeah.
Why this issue? Why this in particular? Like, I could see it if you lost a kid in a custody battle to your wife who was a trans enthusiast, but you're just a guy from BC who, who saw early, as courageous people do, right? You're one of the people who saw something early and decided to do something about it. But what did you see? Why this issue? Why then?
I see this as a cult that has spread all throughout society and captured our most important organizations, captured our government. Our government, in many ways, is the de facto cult leader. I had a previous experience in the 90s with a cult for a couple of years. So I understand the dynamics at play. I understand the frailty of the human mind and how easily manipulated people are, and especially kids. And I just knew what to do that would work. Some people hear about this and they go, wow, that's crazy, and they kind of forget about it. Others hear about this and they go, oh my gosh, and it really impacts them. And I cannot imagine, as a dad, if my girls were impacted by this, how devastating it would be to be losing my daughters or my daughter to this cult that sinks its tentacles in and slowly separates these kids from their parents and then gives them these drugs and hormones and surgeries and sterilizes them and maims them and turns these little boys into lifetime medical patients who are anorgasmic, maimed, never able to have a family. This is evil. This is evil at its core. There is nothing good about it. And we cannot live in a society that allows this to happen. And I was not going to look back in my life and say I knew all about it, because as soon as I learned about this, every day I was reading and learning more and more and more and more. And I was not going to look back in my life and say I knew about it and didn't do anything about it. It just didn't sit with me. It felt like a calling. I had a vision. I knew exactly what I could do. I knew it would work. I knew I'd be ridiculed. I knew I'd get attacked. I knew I'd lose tons of friends and money. But I don't care, because life is not about chasing money. I'm living a purpose-filled life now. I'm super happy doing what I do, even though it's hard. But my gosh, why are we here on this earth? We cannot allow this to continue. And so no one was talking about this in the right way, in my opinion, or very few. And we had to get out into the real world. No one was doing it in the real world, reaching people from all walks of life. And so I've had hard times in life, and nothing that the world is going to bring to me is going to be harder than anything I've already been through. So I don't care. I'll just keep going out there, and people can ridicule me because I'm a human sandwich board or whatever. And I get it. Those are not typically the most reliable people in the world.
Yeah.
But the signs are just there. They are just a means to solicit conversation.
Yeah.
That's all they're there for. I don't consider myself a protester. I have held some protests, but those signs are just there to spark conversation.
Yeah.
Because one person at a time is how we're going to fix this. People need to be able to protect their own kids, and that's what I'm called in this life to do. That's what I believe.
Well, what do you do for a living when you're not doing this? How do you earn money?
I don't. I've just been doing this. I've just been raising awareness for 2.5 years.
No, but I mean before that, what line of work were you in?
Most of my adult life, I was a financial advisor. I was an investment advisor for 13 years. Then I had a small insurance business. I didn't really love that line of work. It was fine. I got sued by a couple liars for $1 million at one point. And I said to myself, why am I working so hard trying to help all these people when people can just lie and sue you and try to make your life miserable and cost you money?
Yeah.
So I didn't love that line of work, but you know how it is. You're raising a family, you got little kids, and you got to bring home the bacon. But I have lost a lot of money doing this. I don't have any money. I haven't had any money from day one, but I just take it one day at a time. And I've had individual donors from around the world just chipping away $30, $50 at a time, donating through my website. And I managed to skate by. It would be nice if a big donor came along at some point and helped me, because I have a whole lot of other things I need to do.
Yeah.
But I'm fine. I'll survive.
Well, you should sell your life story to Hollywood or something, because not Hollywood, they'd never do it, but maybe to the Daily Wire or somebody. Yeah. But so are you still married?
Oh yeah, of course.
And she's fine?
I've got a beautiful family.
Wow, like she must be an angel from heaven.
I'm not gone as much as it seems. I do take one big trip every month into the US now. That's just the best use of my time going down there.
Yeah.
Probably a second shorter month. But no, my family love me and support me,
Good.
and I couldn't do any of this without them.
So I want to ask you about something you alluded to just earlier. And it's one of the darker things about this that I've really come to be worried about. And that is how it seems the teachers are trying to separate children from their parents. Tell me what you know about that and how it's manifesting itself.
So it is the policy of pretty much every province in Canada. I haven't dug deeply into every single one. I know in British Columbia, for example, it's written down in the BCTF's policy manual that they will not tell the parents if a child has changed their name and pronouns at school, because parents are treated by default as though they are a threat to their own child. This is totally outrageous. This is going on all over the United States, school districts, entire states. It's everywhere. And here's the thing about teachers. If they think there's abuse going on at the home, they are already mandatory reporters where they need to contact CPS.
Yeah.
But again, the left has pushed this thinking that these children are so oppressed, that they're at risk from their own parents if we force them to come out to their parents. So we need to protect them from their own parents.
Wow.
My gosh, what an outrage. There is a bill called the Given Name Act that the Heritage Foundation has drawn up in the United States, which every state should be adopting. We should have the same thing up here in Canada. And it would just simply prohibit schools from keeping this vital information a secret from parents. People try to reasonably say that, oh, well, some parents would be mad. And some kids who've come out as gay have had problems with their families. And they'll always cite you one case somewhere where someone committed suicide.
Yeah.
They love to weaponize suicide for every single argument.
Yes, they do.
Because what do most people say? What do people say to that argument? It's kind of hard to argue with. This is a coercive tactic used to silence conversation.
And
it's the number one thing you hear when you talk about,
no, I was just going to say, it's not underpinned by facts, right?
It's not. Like with the transition of children, for example, we have no studies, first of all. And so, again, on the street, when I hear this argument, I always try to agree with people, find some source of agreement. I'm not out there to fight with people. I'm not there to have a debate. I'm there to have a conversation. So it's true that suicidality is higher with these kids. It's higher for kids with anorexia and bulimia and personality disorders and kids who've suffered abuse. Obviously, these kids are struggling. They're having an identity crisis. They're not happy with their own body. Obviously, suicidality is going to be higher. But actual suicides are still vanishingly rare. And if we look at the only actual proper studies we have, the best one's from Sweden, where nobody was lost to follow-up, because what happens now in the United States and Canada, if some kid starts on testosterone and stops 3 months later, they have no idea. There's no follow-up.
Yeah.
You can't even say that this is an experiment on kids because it's not being done in a proper experimental setting where there's follow-up and everything. This whole thing is just the Wild West of medicine. But the best study we have shows that with adults, so these are people whose brains have basically already developed, not kids, with adults who transitioned, suicide rates peaked 10 years after the fact and were 19.1 times higher than their peers after accounting for similar mental health comorbidities.
Wow.
So it's just a lie. Yeah. It's just a lie. But this subject of keeping secrets from parents, I wrote a thread the other day on Twitter. Where were these teachers at school when my daughter was 3 and had a fever of 103 degrees and I'm laying with her at night, holding a cold cloth to her forehead, cleaning up the vomit off her sheets? Where were these teachers when I was running beside my daughter the first time she rode her bike, making sure she didn't fall? Where were they when my little baby was crying through the night for no apparent reason other than she just didn't want to sleep? And with my back out, I swaddled her in 4 blankets and took her for an hour-long walk in the snow, looking at the Christmas lights until she fell asleep in my arms and I put her back in bed. Where were these teachers for these thousands of moments where parents make sacrifice after sacrifice for their children? Most of these teachers were still in high school. And now they want to act like they're the parent and that they love these kids more and that parents are a threat to their own child. This is totally insane, and we've got to put a stop to it. This is grooming. It is one of the stages of grooming. They are keeping secrets from parents, not just any secret. This child is having an identity crisis. This is a girl who has been taught that there's something wrong with her. When you teach a child that they're born in the wrong body or that they're really a boy on the inside, the message you are sending is that there's something wrong with them. When you use different pronouns for these children, every single time you use that pronoun, you are affirming this idea that there is something wrong with the way they were born. Yeah. It's abusive. And they're hiding this from parents. They're making this identity crisis worse and worse and worse. These children's mental health starts to spiral downwards. And by the time the parents find out, well, they're so heavily indoctrinated, the school has driven this wedge between them and their parents. It can be really hard to reach these kids, half of whom, by the way, are on the autism spectrum.
Yeah. And I suspect borderline personality too, because of the cutting and the other things, and so there's obviously on the suicide front, given that there's frequently a constellation of other things going on, the ideation isn't necessarily from being trans or not being trans, right? These are kids who've got trouble. And I think we have to look at our society to say, wow, why are we creating so many troubled kids? That's another story. Get them off screens. Get them back to church, but you know they're clearly struggling, and to suggest that transing is the answer is ridiculous. But here's the other thing I've noticed, Chris, that in the various videos I've seen of the kind of really aggressively trans teachers who are pushing, or gender fluid teachers, I guess, who are pushing trans ideology on the students. It seems the way it's being pitched is also that it's better, you know, that you're cooler, the colors are brighter, you get a flag, you know, you're the center of attention because you're doing something different in a good way. Like it feels like it's being marketed in a sense.
100%. So all these ideologies that are being taught in school today, these leftist, neo-Marxist ideologies, they teach that there is this fundamental dynamic of oppressor and victim.
Yeah.
And we call these neo-Marxist ideologies because in Marxism, traditional Marxism, it was your economic status that was the source of inequality and the source of oppression. The same idea applies to race with critical race theory, that by virtue of being white, you're an oppressor, and by virtue of being black or of color, that you are somehow a victim. The same thing applies with gender and sexuality. And so all these kids constantly are being fed this buffet of victimhood, not of victory, not of being strong, not of being positive, not of one of unity, where we're all on this little blue marble traveling through space together, and the amount of melanin in our skin doesn't matter. They're focusing on all these different things, and it's not cool now. It's really uncool to be what they call cisgender, heterosexual, cishet. Of course, white males are at the top of this so-called oppression pyramid, but these kids get celebrated when they come out with some special identity.
Yeah.
There is a crisis of especially girls wanting some special identity, because you take these kids who aren't fitting in, they're not popular. All these kids that end up at the gender clinic, it's these kids. It's not the high school cheerleader and the college quarterback. It's the struggling kids. It's the kind of artsy, weird kids who might have been goth in a previous day, who aren't fitting in. As soon as they come out with one of these identities, they're celebrated.
Yeah.
I was in Boston for the unveiling of the Martin Luther King statue. I had a protest at the Boston Children's Hospital the next day. And this young white woman was basically yelling at me, being obnoxious.
Yeah.
And this beautiful black mama came to defend me. Black mama bear. Gorgeous, wonderful human being. And this was such interesting video to capture because this mom has 6 kids. She had 3 kids, then she had a bit of a break, then she had 3 more kids. So 2 different generations, really. The first generation, no problem. Her last 3 kids, they're all caught up in these ideologies.
Ooh.
And her 11-year-old daughter, 11, tells her that all the girls at school identify as bisexual or lesbian.
Yeah. It's unbelievable.
Because this is a craze.
I can't.
This is a craze.
Yeah, I can't. It's very, very scary. I tell a story about being down at, this was from 2 years ago. I was down at one of the early trucker rallies down at, the truckers didn't exist yet. It was just like an early COVID questioning the narrative rally down at Queen's Park here. And I was sitting with my girlfriend on a bench, and 3 young women walked by, and one of them was sobbing. Seemed like university student age, sobbing. And of course, with both of us being moms, we said, "Oh, what's wrong with her? Is she okay? Can we help? What's the problem?" And he said, "Oh, it's anxiety." Right. And I said, "Well, what's she anxious about?" "Oh, we saw somebody over there not wearing a mask and she's freaking out about it." Like she was on the other side of the park, right? She was actually having a meltdown. Like she was hysterical about it, right? And we said, "Well, does she have anxiety?" "Oh, yes, anxiety is a terrible problem." I wish I'd rolled video on it. It was so extraordinary. And it was kind of normal for these young women that people are that freaked out by the smallest of things.
Yes.
You know, it was I was really, wow. I was really, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I couldn't believe it.
This all goes back to schools.
Yeah.
It's all these things they're teaching in school. It's not just gender, it's everything. And about 30% of these teenage kids are depressed today.
Yeah.
And the use of pharmaceutical drugs to help with depression and anxiety is at all-time highs all throughout the population.
Well, and then you throw school closures.
But man, we just need to teach these kids.
Yeah.
Yeah. The fear.
Yeah.
The fear porn that the
porn.
media sells all the time.
Fear porn. Yeah, I know.
All these young kids wearing masks constantly. The masks do nothing. And this isn't an opinion. This is science. They never did anything. For anyone who thought about this for half a second, obviously masks do nothing with an aerosolized virus. Well, when you're breathing your cloth mask, you're still breathing outside. You're breathing all your air into the room. It's all floating around. It's going right through the holes of the mask. It's coming out the sides, the top, the bottom.
Yeah.
Masks do nothing. And Fauci knew this too. We're getting totally off track. But it was the school unions who made sure that everyone had to be masked. It was the school unions who demanded closures.
These awful, awful teachers.
And so what happens during the school closures? And during the school closures, what happens to these kids? They're online all day long.
Yeah.
They weren't even hanging out with their friends.
Not good.
So they're online. Now they're getting groomed online. They're falling into this trans stuff online. And the algorithms of these social media companies feed them the same diet of lies all day long. TikTok, Tumblr, Reddit, YouTube, these are terrible for kids. So we haven't talked about social media, but that's another reason all this is happening. Social media is just terrible. Kids have to stay off of it.
I agree with you.
This poor generation of children has been subjected to so many experimental things for the first time ever. Their psychology is really suffering for it. And now we have all these crazy leftist ideologies brainwashing them. It's no wonder you have so many kids who want to escape what they are.
Yeah. No, I completely agree with you. I think we all have a lot to answer for. My kids are grown, but I do say this on the show now with some certainty, and that is this. If I had school-age children now, they would be being educated at home. And they would be educated at home not just to keep them out of the clutches of the nutcases in the school system right now, but also to keep them off social media, right? Because I think it's hard for a kid to go to school and not have a phone and not have, so just keep them away. Find a like-minded pod of parents and do your own thing away from all of that craziness, because this is leading to a bad place. And I fear that when these generations are in charge of the world, it's just going to get worse, right? Because they're not rational. They're frequently not rational. And I think we're breeding a generation of people who will be mentally very unstable unless we intervene in a significant way, especially because of school closures. I'm going to say goodbye, but I just want to say that, remind you, the last time I talked to you, you'd been quite badly beaten up by some people in Montreal while you were out there doing your thing, Antifa, I think. How are you doing? And does that still happen to you?
There have been some things in Canada since then. Yeah, I got jumped by Antifa. I had my arm broken. And you got me in an emotional point because, I mean, at the time, you jump by all these people. I don't even know how many people they are. Taking some pretty big shots to the back of my head. One shot left a dent in the base of my head. My chiropractor was working on that. Got my arm broken. And then my girls, I talked to them in the morning and they're emotional, of course, because they see that I'm cut up. And you got me in an emotional time there on no sleep. But yeah, Canada's in a big bunch of trouble. What can I say? The youth is in trouble.
Yeah.
And this is led by the government and by the most divisive prime minister in Canadian history. This wretched human being, Justin Trudeau. We have to get proper leadership in this country if we ever plan to fix anything. All of these extreme leftist organizations are getting people elected.
Yeah.
These aren't really representatives of the people as a whole. The Minister of State in charge of childcare now in British Columbia is a woman named Grace Lohr. She was the professor of gender studies at the University of Victoria. I have a long story about her. I talked to her one day. You wouldn't believe this story. I got kicked out of the NDP's campaign headquarters after making them feel unsafe because I calmly talked about what was happening to kids and how a rapist was sent into a women's prison in the Fraser Valley. And they said I was making them feel unsafe. Anyway, she's now the minister in charge of childcare in BC. The Liberals, the NDP might as well just call themselves the trans party.
Yeah.
These parties are gone.
Yeah.
They're totally gone.
Yeah.
And the Conservative Party in Canada is weak. Pierre Poilievre will not say a single thing. Yeah. Not one Conservative MP will say a single thing. We have virtually every Republican now in the United States speaking out against this, but not one Conservative will say a simple truth. It's pathetic. So if this country is going to fix itself, it needs a true leader of the Conservative Party, because it's going to be the Conservatives. But where's that leader coming from? They won't allow people like me, for example, to even run for the party.
Yeah, I don't know. I think we need Ron DeSantis. That's who we need. But I'll tell you something that's very worrisome. I speak to really smart people from around the world. They all have something negative to say about Prime Minister Trudeau. About our media, they say, how are you surviving in Canada? Oh, how did you ever elect Justin Trudeau? I'm like, oh, I don't know. All of a sudden I wake up and I'm in the worst country in the world. You know, our media is terrible. We don't even have the equivalent of Fox News here. We don't even have that.
Right.
Not that I love Fox, but you know, there's some like Tucker's pretty good and he's kicking butt, but we don't even have that. We don't even have that. There are some people bubbling up. But they're not doing journalism. They're doing like extreme opinion, and that's not going to move anybody. They're going to preach to the converted and everybody say, yay, good. But, you know, they don't have any sort of journalistic credibility. So we don't even have that in this country. And everybody. We
have you.
Yeah, but you know, thank you. But my audience is not huge. You know, I mean, look, we do okay. And I'm proud of what we've achieved here. But we don't, you know.
Yeah, we need more of you.
We need more of me, or we need, I don't know what we need, but it's frightening. I can't even think about it because like I did an interview with Piers Robinson, who's a big propaganda specialist that's coming up next week. And, you know, he was talking about how, especially in Canada, we're like under the thumb of this kind of era where, you know, the media is paid for by government. You know, the public is peeling off of legacy media, but they're ramping up their attacks then on indie media. I mean, it's a very, very bad situation. People have to find the indie media places they like and that they can trust, and they've got to support them financially. That has to be part of the equation, right? There's so many of us now that people have got to decide who they want to support, and they've got to support them because we can't go on forever. I'm doing okay. Yeah. I haven't taken a salary in 3 years. You know, I pay the people who work for me. That's about it. Right. People have got to recognize that they have to start supporting things that they believe in. You can't passively lay back and watch CTV News and think you're being informed, because you're not. And the next thing you know, there'll be another war. There's a war coming up soon, you know, and we've got to support the people. Go to Substack, find your favorite Substack writers and support them. You know, it's really important, really important.
Yeah, the situation in Canada is scary because we have these radical leftist leaders who have control of the
Yep.
media. And when you can control the media, you can control the messaging, and then you can control the population. So if these conservatives don't find some courage to start speaking the truth, I'm telling you, Trish, if I have to, and I would hate to, but if I have to run for leadership of the Conservative Party in 10 years' time, when I have 1 million Twitter followers and I've been at this for 10 years, I'll do it. Because all we need is one good, truth-telling leader to change the direction of this entire country. We saw it in Florida. Andrew Gillum was 1% away from being the governor of Florida. And if he'd won, my gosh, that state would be a total different picture. And that's all it takes.
And COVID policy would be different too, because DeSantis was really leading the way, saying we don't have to do these crazy things and our numbers are going to be fine, and they were. So thank God for that. I think Andrew Gillum was kind of caught with his pants down, right? Wasn't he in some sex scandal? Literally. I know, gross.
Yeah,
just a horrible person,
yeah.
Just gross. I mean, really. Ugh.
Yeah.
It's awful. It's just awful. I can't take it. Anyway, look, I had you on because, well, for a variety of reasons, but one of them is that you're just a positive and heroic light for people to see how one person can make a difference. I was thrilled when I read you were on Vivek's show, because it means you're getting traction in the States. And then if things start happening there, they'll maybe slop over and start happening here.
They will.
Yeah. So good for you. One person can do, you were just kind of an eccentric guy with a sandwich board, and now you're really spreading a message, and you should be.
Yeah. The outside opinion might have been that I'm an eccentric guy. I'm really quite normal,
I know.
but extreme times call for extreme measures.
Yeah, I know.
Extreme times call for extreme measures. So you got to do what you got to do sometime. But hopefully I'm meeting DeSantis at the end of the month. I'm speaking, on a panel and at some dinners and things regarding some new bills in Florida. Good. So I'm making some powerful friends down in the States. And my position has always been, if the States fixes this, the whole world takes notice. And what happens down there does bleed across the border. Canada.
I know it does.
So we are going to fix this. It's just a matter of time.
I know Scandinavia is kind of leading the way, as they did on COVID too. Denmark is a kind of slow. They did the first sex change, I found out today doing some research for the show, but I'm sure they're next, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
They're coming. All those Scandinavian countries, they're not controlled by so many moneyed interests over there. That's another problem. There's a lot of money behind the leaders of the AP and everything. So we just have to create enough outrage, and we will, and this will stop.
So I think people should follow your Twitter. And they should also follow Jennifer Belak too, 11th Hour, because she's the one documenting all the big money behind this, all the rich trans people. The person who owns satellite, or used to own Sirius Satellite Radio, who's a billionaire, has moved to Canada, who's funding all these things, and a Pritzker cousin, the Chicago, I think he's the governor, right? His cousin is trans. They're funding all these things. There's big money for medical schools and academia behind all this. Of course, it's always followed the money, isn't it? But people like Chris are going to put a stop to it. And we're sort of proud of that. So well done, Chris.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me, Trish.
I'll talk to you soon. Bye.
All right.
That was Chris Elston, also known as Billboard Chris, who is making waves around the world. I want to talk about the just very briefly about the failure of the Silicon Valley Bank. There was an excellent piece in the London Telegraph, which, as you know, I just got a subscription to, and I'm glad I did. They do some good reporting. This is a guy named Jeremy Warner, and it's the most astonishing piece about the failure of this bank. He says, here we go again. The circumstances may be different, but the underlying causes are much the same. A well-functioning banking system is an essential backdrop to any successful market economy, but banks themselves are intrinsically dangerous, interconnected beasts that once off the leash almost invariably end up creating financial havoc. Most famously, it was an unsafe banking system that lay behind the misery of the Great Depression in the 1930s, America and Europe. And but for massive taxpayer interventions, it might have happened again during the banking crisis of 2008 to 10. As it was, the fallout was quite bad enough. It therefore barely seems credible that little more than a decade after the financial system last went belly up, we should once again be peering over the cliff edge into the abyss of another cascading outbreak of destabilizing insolvency and financial market contagion. Yet here we are. And though the scenery is not the same, and we can be fairly certain that this is not yet another Lehman Brothers moment, the underlying issues are eerily familiar. Up went the cry after the catastrophe of the last banking crisis, never again should the taxpayer be on the hook for the excesses of casino-style finance. A veritable straitjacket of new rules and regulations was applied on both sides of the Atlantic to prevent the mishaps of bankers from ever leaking onto the public balance sheet. After technically speaking, the trials of the Silicon Valley Bank and its crypto brother in crime, Signature Bank, have not yet done so. Jeremy Hunt, the UK Chancellor, was at pains to stress when announcing that HSBC was taking on responsibility for SVB's UK arm that there was no taxpayer involvement. Janet Yellen, the U.S. Treasury Secretary, was similarly keen to emphasize in underwriting SVP deposits that any loss to the taxpayer would be recouped via a levy on other banks. There will be no government bailout, she insisted. In a sense that shareholders and bondholders in SVB will have lost all their money, the U.S. The message is clear. All depositors throughout the U.S. banking system are now underwritten by the state. This may have been the right thing to do to prevent a domino effect on bank runs, but let's not pretend it's anything but a bailout. So I really like this guy. He's a terrific writer. Why is it that British newspaper people write so well and we don't over here in North America? We just don't. Okay. 2 quick pieces of business. I want to remind you of the B4Chi.com website. B is in the letter B, 4 is in FOR, Chi is in KAI.com. It's about the meningitis B vaccine. It is being supported by, it was actually created by Kai Matthews' parents, the young man who died of meningitis B, because he didn't have the vaccine and the parents didn't know about it, but also because the medical system in Nova Scotia was so focused on COVID-19 that they released him from hospital 3 times, even though his parents kept bringing him back, and clearly he was gravely ill. So I just had an encounter with Kai's dad, Nori, and I'm happy to remind you all of b4chi.com. And lastly, the Ideas Institute is presenting its Speakeasy series, a dine and discuss event, Willful Blindness, an examination of mainstream journalism. Today, guest speaker David M. Haskell, Associate Professor, Digital Media and Journalism, Religion and Culture. And it's Saturday, March 18th, so I'm not giving you much of a heads up. I'm so very sorry, but if they're not sold out, it's in Cambridge, Ontario, fun night out for the weekend if you're in Toronto or nearby. Go, because these meetings where we all get together and talk about these ideas are really, really good for us. We realize we are not alone. So go if you can, if they're not sold out. I said I'd promote it. Happy to do so. And also the Citizens Inquiry got underway in Truro this week. And a lot of people said, I thought you were the spokesperson. I was for a couple of months, but then I realized it was just too much for me to take on with all my other responsibilities. I'd said at the beginning of COVID, I would say yes to everything because I felt it was so important to bring forward all the things I was learning in any possible forum, regardless of what the politics were, who was doing it. I just thought I was going to say yes, yes, yes. But this was a bridge too far, even for me. The wind-up doll of talking. But they have a new spokesperson and she's wonderful and they're doing good work. So you should pay attention to them. Find their website, find their live stream, and watch this unfold across the country. Stay critical.